All right. Our next poet and storyteller is Rolyat Mosi, who navigates the creative world of collective words aimed at the inside of the mind. He has been editing and revamping writings from yesteryear and expanding his events in refining his many creative compositions. Rolyat.
Hello, and we're grateful to the Seattle Library Foundation and the Seattle Library System for partnering with us in this endeavor. I'm going to read two pieces from my Juneteenth series and one from my Kwanzaa story. We don't celebrate Juneteenth no more. In the years following the Emancipation Proclamation, Black folks in their local communities celebrated Juneteenth robustly all around the country. Juneteenth was a holiday of jubilation in which Black folks remembered their struggle for freedom and celebrated their connection with their shared history. Surrounded by joy, laughter, and songs, these celebrations were meant both to remember the history of enslavement and to encourage Black folk to continue their fight for their political right. In the first few decades of Juneteenth celebrations, Black folks were celebrating all over, and especially in the states of Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Black folks used the celebration to help search for lost members of their family. Many local newspapers received ads placed by Black people who were ex-slaves. As these Southern Blacks moved out of their region, they took Juneteenth to other areas in the U.S. However, freedom challenges themselves started to lead to a decline in Juneteenth activities and events in the late 1890s to the early 1900s. The traditional practices at home and family taught lessons slowed. Now, state-approved curriculum in classroom textbooks did the education, but stifled the interests of Black youth with less, if any, focus on the details of the lives of former slaves. There were little emphasis on old slave history. America was starting to whitewash the Black enslavement truths from Americans. These factors began a decline in the Juneteenth activities in the early 1900s. Public classrooms of early 1900s taught that slavery ended with Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and never dealt with the continued enslavement of Black people in Texas and other areas of the U.S. In addition, down south, Black people continued to face intense threat of life, physical violence, and political oppression in the early 1900s, particularly with the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. Juneteenth celebrations became quite unwelcome and not tolerated. The Depression forced many people off the farms and into the cities to find work where economic met Black culture, causing a decline in Juneteenth celebration in the early 20th century. The Depression saw Blacks come to the northern and Midwest cities in droves, fresh from the farm with Juneteenth in their songs, to the urban areas holding differences in appreciation for such celebration. The big city bosses had no soft spot in their hearts for Negro celebration. They were even less concerned with any slave talking. The bosses only wanted workers, cheap, hard-working workers. Employees let their Negro workers know that they could celebrate the 4th of July as their independence holiday, the true patriotic American celebration. Even domestic workers had it no better and found themselves working on Juneteenth, making beds with quiet reserve. Additionally, there were no publicly sponsored celebration events, and few, if any, news articles. Even the politicians were silent on this Negro stuff, like Juneteenth. Schools' textbooks clearly proclaimed that America was shunning all and any talk about Juneteenth and slavery itself. Juneteenth is alive and well. There's no clean vanilla version of this story. There's no need for tracking dates of U.S. slavery abolishment. There's no need to focus on Mississippi's final approval of the Emancipation Proclamation. There's no poetic piece that can make it easier to emotionally swallow or to be digestively gentle. There's no analysis on how Juneteenth managed through life in American society. There is no foundation except for the old document by Lincoln. There was a downturn in the turn of the century. There was a comeback of Juneteenth to the masses of the U.S. people as the 20th century moved on. There is a good idea of how to do and taste Juneteenth. There are still those old slave songs from the cotton field that have risen up to be spiritual. There's plenty of knowledge on how Juneteenth looked in today's society. There's good measures of dates of the U.S. state holidays, but there's no national holiday that binds us all in the truth of the Juneteenth experience. Juneteenth is alive and well. Kwanzaa Black Eyed Peas. Yep, Black Eyed Peas made it to Kwanzaa. This dish was destined to be part of such an African cultural party experience, especially with a meal like the Kwanzaa Karamu meal. In the early community celebrations, there were welcome traditional African culinary dishes. Kwanzaa Black Eyed Peas. Yep, Black Eyed Peas made it to Kwanzaa. The dish was destined to be a part of such an African cultural party experience, especially with a meal like the Kwanzaa Karamu feast. In the early celebrations, there were welcome African traditional culinary dishes, and they were pretty much mixed with soul food. The Black Eyed Peas were predominantly featured at the center of the table. If you add curry, the two dishes and culinary styles were almost the same. Years ago, down south, if Black Eyed Peas were on the menu, they were served as Hoppin' John. Hoppin' Johns were the black-eyed pea and rice dish eaten in the Old South. There, too, was the tradition for this New Year's dish that believed to bring good luck. Now, this dish has become a major dish during the Kwanzaa Karamu feast, celebrated on December 31st, the last eve of Kwanzaa. Since the Kwanzaa celebration ends New Year's Day, it only naturally coincides with the traditional eating of black-eyed peas across Black culture. The traditional dish is normally served with greens, sweet potatoes, rice, and your desired cornbread, hush puppies, or hot water cornbread. I like to add hot sauce to mine. Eating black-eyed peas on New Year's Day has been considered good luck for at least 1,500 years. These peas were eaten in Africa as a staple bean. It is recorded in the Talmud over 500 AD that a portion of black-eyed peas was good for you. It is also a Jewish custom at the time to eat black-eyed peas in celebration of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year's that happens every fall. In the Black Southern states, black-eyed peas are a traditional symbol of the emancipation of previously enslaved Black people, officially freed on New Year's Day after the Civil War. The Kwanzaa Karamu feast is traditionally held on the last eve of Kwanzaa, and celebrant started early. It is a very special event, as it is the one Kwanzaa event that brings us closer to our African roots. The Kwanzaa Karamu feast is a communal and collective effort. Ceremonies and cultural expressions are highly encouraged, and black-eyed peas are at the center of the table for the feast.
Thank you, Rolyat Mosi. Wonderful.